Okay. To start, I need to do some groundwork. There are some basic questions that need to be addressed in order to create the base for discussion. Unfortunately, I don't have time to delve far, as this work usually takes at least a full day, if not a weekend, by Dez. So to compress it into an hour or so is quite a task. I will be skipping over things that you'll want to hear about, but take note of them and perhaps we can come back to them at another time. I will give you a warning of nudity and apologies for the abbreviated form of the presentation and the need to rush. And to Dez, I need to apologize as well, as I figure I'm a poor substitute in many ways, but we'll see how we go. Why isn't this going? Okay, there, I've worked out how it works. Excellent. So one thing I want to point out is this is not what tonight's presentation is about. This is not about how to win photo competitions. And if you want to, there are lots of things you can go to on the web, these being two of them, 2 ebooks that are available if you want that sort of information. I just want to start that right from the beginning. But let's consider some of the things we do need to consider. I'm not going to show you the English derivation of the Greek. I think we all know that. I am going to suggest that a photograph can be one of 3 things: a record, a document, or a conceptual or expressive image. Following on from this, the criteria for evaluating each of those types of images can be quite different. So here you have a breakdown, and again, all the schematics come from Dez. I want to make it quite clear that this is not my work. I am merely being his mouthpiece. So I'll distinguish between a record and a document because you'll see that they're grouped together in this schematic on the left-hand side. The record can convey information, it's factual, it shows us our world. Think about nature, think about scientific photography, think about all the shots of the opera house you've ever seen. They are not to be dismissed. They are important, they have value. Documents, on the other hand, can be ideas-driven. They can tell the stories of the world around us. They can be sight-changing. They observe society through the camera. Think of our documentary photographers such as Sebastião Salgado or Edward Bertensky, Cartier-Bresson. There's a ream of them. Again, the importance of this work is not to be denied. Oh, no, actually, I'll go back. No, I won't. Bear with me. Because we should also have a look at what a conceptual image is. It's subjective, it's subversive, it invites exploration, it poses questions. It can be dissonant, unique and expressive, emotional and spiritual. And a big change between the 2 types of images is that an expressive and conceptual image is ortho-seeing as opposed to camera-based. So if everyone is happy with those sorts of definitions or distinctions between the 3 types of images, then we can move on, because evaluating each of those is quite different. Why do we photograph? So what is a photograph? Now, why do we photograph? The reason I ask is not only to focus my mind on what a photograph is and what I need to let you know about it tonight, but also to focus you there as well. Why do we photograph? There are myriad responses covering needs from the very basics to the most complex. The phrase artistic expression often crops up. I hope that what I will be presenting here tonight will address a range of those needs. Basically, we use the camera as a tool to communicate an idea. So you can ask yourself these questions. Intention, what do you wish to say, to share? Meaning, How do I convert this to the audience? Interpretation, how to research, edit, cull, trial, sample, test your images. Representation, how are you going to present them? And then the expression, the text. Often Dez refers to an image as a text because he always refers to photography as a form of visual communication. What does that text say? Another question we might want to look at is, why do we want to evaluate images? Overwhelmingly, you're here to improve your photography. You've shown this by seeking out like-minded people within the Mosman Photographic Society and hopefully embracing all that they have to offer. A key tool is learning how to evaluate images, others, and especially your own. There is no shortage of photography in the world available for analysis. The question becomes, how do you go about it in an effective manner? Why do we want to evaluate images? Of course, overwhelmingly, you're here to improve your photography. A key tool is learning how to evaluate images. So if we move on to what makes a good photograph, how to decide what criteria to use, going right to the source of all current knowledge, we can look at Wikipedia. And this is a list of the highest prices paid for photographs in the year 2021, or up to the year 2021. I have some of the images to show. As we move through them, consider what sort of a photograph they are. A record, a document, or conceptual. It's interesting to note that of the top 27, I think 8 belong to Andreas Gursky, 7 belong to Cindy Sherman. There's a smattering of others in there, but not many. So here is the #1 image that sold for $4.3 million. It is conceptual in nature because that scene actually does not exist. He took an image and then he massaged it into what he wanted. This is called Spiritual America, and it's a photograph of a nude 10-year-old Brooke Shields. It was originally taken by a photographer by the name of Gary Gross. Richard Prince then took the photograph, put it in a gilded frame, and displayed it without any commentary on it. Richard Prince is known as an appropriator of imagery. This is the first of the Cindy Shermans, and it's part of her cinema stills, Untitled 96. Again, a conceptual image because she dresses up, sets the scene, and then takes the photograph. They're all self-portraits. Interestingly, I don't know a lot about this image. It's more about the people who made it. They are almost like a performance duo of photographers. They're known as Gilbert and George, and they have an outstanding photography career by taking photos themed with various topics around the world and society. And they're big images and they sell for big money. Dead Troops Talk by Jeff Wall. Wall merges conventions from war and horror movies with those of the history painting of previous eras to create an elaborate, grotesque fiction. Again, conceptual. Another Gursky. And another. And finally, a vintage print from Man Ray. And I would also contend that it is a conceptual image. At 11, another vintage print, Edward Steichen. And the extraordinary sale price of the print is in part attributable to its one-of-a-kind character and to its rarity, as is the next one, which I couldn't help putting in because I think it's great. Billy the Kid. So looking back on that range of images, they have value, but perhaps not for us as people who have an interest in photography. They have value in the art world, and they have value to collectors. So that's one way of looking at imagery, whether it has value as to collectors and in an art world. But the politics of collecting photography and art is something I don't even want to touch on. So I think this is a good point to leave the idea of the value of an image and move on to something closer to home, the evaluation of an image, with the underlying idea of improving one's personal photography. Phil, do you recognize the emblem in the top left of the image?
I've got a copy of the book right here.
So this book was printed in 1974 by the, mental blank. Come on, what is it?
Federation of Camera Clubs.
Thank you. Mental blank. And this was their criteria for judging an image. And I won't read them all out. I'll just point you to the number of points that come down. And then on the last one, it has the picture maker communicated so well that the viewer is taken into the picture and become involved with it. So this is 1974. Let's skip ahead a little bit. This is 2013. This book reveals why a photograph need not be crisply rendered or correctly exposed, color balanced, framed, or even composed by the photographer in order to have artistic merit. And that image on the front of the book is by Uta Bath. So how do we navigate the myriad styles, rules, confusions that have been tossed around regarding photography for much longer than the 40 years that separate these two publications? It's interesting to note, as I said, that in 1974, the viewer became involved with the photo only almost as an afterthought, whilst in 2013, it's all about the stuff of dreams. You can learn a lot from the history of photography. We had a look at Steichen's image just before. As an example, the pictorialist took the medium of photography and reinvented it as an art form, placing beauty, tonality, and composition above creating an accurate visual record. That record was initially all that photography was considered to produce. And so photographic styles have waxed and waned through the years. There is boundless information out there breaking down imagery into its component parts, dwelling on the importance of particular images and analysing their various aspects, not to mention the plethora of online resources currently available. The inconsistency displayed by judges at club level or the pundits on the internet. It all comes into how do we approach evaluating images, and even whether photography is considered worthy of putting on an art gallery wall or not. And this was quite a recent set of articles in The Guardian. So the debates raged. The lesson to take away from all of this is, of course, to make up your own mind, to watch, listen, and learn. The end goal is to develop your own style and be confident that the visual language that you use reflects who you are as a visual artist. To that end, I think that's the end of the groundwork. Let's proceed. So we're going to look at what is one considered approach, which has the benefit of working with you as the individual. In order for you to communicate, you need to learn the language, in this case, the visual language. This schematic is functional and effective should you choose to use it. It has been proven over many years. And Tim, I'll point out that it wasn't just developed for the FCC. Dez has used it in his visual arts practice and teaching for a good 40 years and has found it to work across all manner of students of which we should be some. So, the levels of evaluation of a photograph, courtesy of Dez Crawley. This is a learning device. It's intended to inform and then be adapted by the individual to suit his or her own creative goals and personal style. When I sound, from here on in, when I sound like I know what I'm talking about, those will be Dez's words, okay? So this was our first taste. This is your first decision as an image maker or image taker. What is your intention? To record, to document, to convey an idea. Don't panic. We will work through it and see where we get to in the end. And I will be rushing through this. I know I will be in order to get through it. So I apologize for that, but I can't see any other way around it. And I will talk to Tim. I'll talk to Tim afterwards about perhaps other feedback I can give you or other documentation I can give you that you can refer back to.
We're happy to have a midpoint pit stop for those who need to refill the glasses as well, Susan.
Okay, good. Just tell me when. All right, these are the core questions, but they're not the only questions. And they're a powerful device to use to deconstruct any image, as they have the power to organize a significant amount of information, insight, and interpretation. In deconstructing an image, it is not essential that you ask each question of each image. One or more of these questions will form the basis of your response. Give priority to the questions that points to the distinctive character and quality of the image. For example, if something makes you laugh out loud when you first see it, then obviously humor is going to be a big part of how you analyze that image. In constructing an image, it might be essential that you ask each question. Doing so will encourage you to move away from simply assessing technical or mechanical qualities at the expense of the communicative and expressive. We'll cycle back to this. I reiterate, don't panic, because this is about to come up. The levels move from abstract to concrete, from heightened levels of abstraction and complexity to the simpler concrete ideas within image making. Each level is fluid and are not mutually exclusive. They serve to point to broad areas of deconstruction and give a comprehensive approach to image analysis, avoiding a preoccupation with only one feature of visual literacy. It's impressive, isn't it? Overwhelming too.
Sounds impressive.
The range of criteria within each level are interrelated, they overlap, and they are found to a greater or a lesser extent within every photograph. They are relevant across all genres and to all levels, from beginner to advanced worker. I will explain, we've looked at record, document, and expressive. I don't know if anyone has heard of studium and punctum. So I thought I might add a little bit of a note about that. It comes from a work called Camera Lucida by a French philosopher called Roland Barthes. He wrote this, it was his last publication at the end of his life and was considered his most beautiful and his most painful. Studium is to study and to examine. Punctum is poignancy, heightened level of emotional tension, hits you in the guts, makes you cry, makes you feel. Studium, on the other hand, are all other photographs. I'm not going to dwell on the mechanics of photography. I think we do that all too much in the normal camera cub judging. But there is a list there for you to go through to make sure that none of those mechanical sides of photography become a problem within your image. because honestly, nowadays, digital photographers have far fewer excuses. The camera alone provides a level of feedback unattainable in analog systems. Digital technology has liberated the camera enthusiast from much of the mistake-based consequences of learning how to capture, manipulate, and print an image. Would you agree, Phil?
Yeah, definitely.
So you look at the histogram, you check your composition post-capture. You have the perfect self-correcting tool at your disposal to address the bulk of these considerations. There are amazing resources available. They seem to be expanding in line with the universe. Consider the resources made available by most camera manufacturers to learn what your camera can do. Specialist interest groups, paid resources such as lynda.com or creativelive.com. Then there are unpaid resources that just abound: YouTube, F64 Academy, podcasts, and there are, of course, the good old-fashioned books and magazines. But there's one thing you must do, is take pictures and work out which ones work and why. Because what you don't want is to have a technical flaw undermine or devalue your creativity and expression. And a quote from Emile Zola: "The artist is nothing without the gift, but the gift is nothing without work." And just to show you the opposite of that, here's an example of ideation overcoming technical challenges. These are the D-Day photos, or two of the D-Day photos of Robert Capa. They are called in total the Magnificent 11, and they were taken on Omaha Beach, and there is an ongoing debate about why they ended up the way they did. But regardless, they are still seen as the epitome of war photography in World War II and getting the soldiers as they landed on the beach at Omaha. So moving on, the value of photography, visual literacy. You have two main areas: the design elements and the language of expression. Both of the halves that comprise visual literacy contain elements used to express ideas. Visual literacy parallels the learning of any other sort of language. We stumble, we fall, we try again until we become familiar with its nuances. We use one word, then two, then phrases, whole sentences, etc. But it's only through the use of the elements of the language that we achieve fluency. As photographers, our fluency may consist of building more complex designs, of going beyond the language to making of art. As we go through some of these elements, think of the iconic photographers whose work has a distinctive style characterized by the use of a particular combination of elements that they have made their own. I can think of one, Irving Penn, who used platinum printing as a style for him and his work. I guess another analogy you could think of would be that of music. The learning of the placement of the notes precedes the progression to scales, precedes the progression to more complex music. The design elements are used with precision and purpose to aid in the expression of the author's intention, as well as to enhance the meaning of the idea. So you can look at those and you could recognize a lot of the work that you already have been doing, what you've used to create those images. Line, shape, form, texture, light, color. They are the major influences, and they get their own bold type. This purposeful arrangement of elements and judicious use of the language of photography speaks to the viewer, prompting a response. This is not an exhaustive list. It is a starting point for your own reading and practice. It is also a way of approaching the deconstruction of photographs. Most are common and often taken for granted. As you move through some of the illustrative images that I've supplied, think about these design elements and the effect that they have on expressive compositional language. I'm hoping to get beyond all of the terminology, etc., and actually get to some imagery. And I think this next panel might allow me to do that. So this is the language of expression, where enriched meaning and intention is conveyed. Composition is used to manipulate the viewer and to inform as to meaning and intention. It refers to the way the design elements are assembled so as to convey intention. A strong idea combined with effective composition will yield or evoke a viewer response. As a corollary, I'm reminded of Ansel Adams' contention that there is nothing worse than a sharp image of a fuzzy concept.
This is, of course, the test page that you'll be coming back to judge.
Yes.
So take note.
Yes. So I have spent a little bit of time with these, and I thought we could go through them as a way of illustrating what we mean. So abstraction, elements combined for their graphic quality. Process is intended to eliminate elements that distract from representation or idea. As photographic practice to hone your visual language and appreciation, Dez suggests approaching each image with the following questions, a shortcut if you like. It's more groundwork. To answer them in depth, I reiterate the need for an extensive visual vocabulary. The schematic that I've sent out to you works hand in hand with these questions to open up that discourse. So let's go through a few simple questions. What do you see? What is the content? Well, I would describe the content as colored wavy lines on a black background. But you have to distinguish between the content and the subject. It can differ markedly. And I've chosen a really obscure example in order to illustrate it, unfortunately. Let's go on to the next question. What is the subject? The subject to me, as the author of this image, is disruption. It's chaos. It's the feeling of fingers running down a blackboard. It is, in fact, my reaction to hearing that Donald Trump had been elected president of the USA. That's my interpretation of my own image. You guys will have a very different interpretation, and every one of them is valid. But I happened to make this as we were landing at Sydney Airport, and the news was literally coming in at the same time saying that Donald Trump had been elected.
Needs a bit more pain and angst, I think, Susan.
Well, I think it was more shock and awe. But anyway, you can see that I'm trying to bring to you a very simple way of approaching an image. So what do you hear? What do you feel? What is the language? What is the language that's being used? So think again about the design elements. Certainly here you could discuss line, rhythm, pattern, repetition, color, balance, space is important, and obviously movement. There are no wrong answers. Whatever it is that you see, feel, hear, say is what you bring to the image. Don't ask what the work is, rather see what the work does. And that's a quote from Eva Hess. Another abstraction. What do you see? What is the content? What's the subject? What do you hear? What do you feel? What is the visual language used? And I'll cycle back to that series of questions again and again. So this is a very straightforward abstraction, a building with its reflections. But this work led on to an exhibition where a series of buildings were juxtaposed to create new architecture. Reduction. I won't read all of them. I get you guys should be able to do that. I found, particularly with new photographers, that something catches their eye and they take the photograph, but they don't always explore what it was that caught their eye in the first place. And reduction, I think, is a great tool to allow you to move through a series of images until you get to where you want to be. I'm reminded of a Susan Sontag quote: "The painter constructs, the photographer discloses," or Minor White's, "Be still with yourself until the object of your attention affirms your presence." I'm a great one for using anybody else's words. I love my quotes. So here's another example of reduction, which is done post-production. The other ones with the palms was actually done by walking into the palm fronds until I got the composition I was actually after. But here, a crop and a removal of some distracting elements reduces the image to what I want you to see. I find sometimes things like reduction and simplification tend to be almost subsets of one another. They intersect at certain points. But reduction is the avoidance of any element that competes or confuses. So just bringing it down to the elements, again, that I want you to see. All done in camera at this point. And the next one is more about what's been left out. So I've used it as simplification as well. I don't need to see the rest of the body because the relationship is all contained within that part of the image.
I'm always one for using literary analogies too, and for these you could use a haiku, for instance.
Yes.
Same approach. How little do you need to say what you want to say?
Exactly.
How much can you say with as little as possible?
Yeah, and you know, the lesson from all of this, when we get to the end, is what you'll pull out different things, but one of those things is to find inspiration from other passions in your life as well. One of mine is music. I've done a whole series of work just listening to sad songs that I don't think I would have ever have even seen if I hadn't had that music in my head at the time. So always pay attention to other passions in your life. They will inform your photography as well. Implication. Element used to suggest presence of compositional feature that's not actually there. Very simple image, very straightforward, but it raises the question for me, where's the bike? Or this one, what do you see? What's the content? What's the subject? Do you hear the bird? Can you feel the breath of wind as it passes you by? What is the visual language used? I think the subject is liberation and freedom, but the content is simply a fuzzy bird. Okay, fire is danger, flower is beauty. Light is salvation, perhaps. Coming out of the darkness into the light. The red nose, of course, has come to represent something quite different to us nowadays. Not that of a clown, but that of a charity and fun. And that is an enormous statue in Paris, and the red nose is about the size of a soccer ball. What do you see? What's the content? What's the subject? What's the visual language? I see convergence. I see figure-ground relationship. I see power. Of course, this one is probably even more straightforward, but the metaphor is a strong one. And with the snow covering the shoulders of Jesus, it even more informs us about how he carried the burdens of the world on the cross. Confrontation. A contested idea or presence. I know I pointed out later on in the talk, but there are some elements that I have difficulty with. I look back on my photographs and think, what have I got to illustrate confrontation? It's not something that is in my normal lexicon, and you will find that as well. And it is interesting. It is interesting to take note of those areas that you either have not noticed, or you've dismissed, or you think are too hard. Take special note of those areas. So with this one, you've got what's happening. You've got line and shape, you've got space, you've got symmetry, you've got balance, you've got repetition, you've got especially relationship, and you've got an implied danger off to the left-hand side of this image that those two birds are reacting to. Here's a different one that I personally find confronting. And it's obviously talking about a social aspect, a social problem even. And it's certainly something that has been in the news recently about the pervasiveness of pornography in our society. And this was just, I mean, actually nowadays you wouldn't find the telephone booths in order to take this photograph. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist though. But I hope you see where I'm coming from and where I'm hopefully taking you to. If you can find an image that has additional layers of meaning, it is going to be a more powerful image. And once you get to these levels of evaluation of a photograph beyond technology, beyond the mechanics, then you can really start having an impact. Narrative. Lots and lots of images have a narrative side to them, the storytelling elements within an image. And before I put this one up, I want to give a little bit of background to it. Do we all remember Cyclone Larry that went through Queensland some years ago now and wiped out the banana production? Well, this was the result. This was a cafe in the rocks. No cash or bananas left on the premises overnight. Text can be an important compositional tool. I mean, I deliberately left that right onto the edge so that it wouldn't dominate the image, but it would inform it greatly as to the context. And here's another one where text is so important, but without the accompanying figure would be nothing. What do you see? What's the content? What is the visual language used? One image can reflect any number of expressive language elements. So here I see emotion. I mean, you're directed to be sad about the idea of diets, but I also see the symbolism and the humor and the implication, because the woman's figure reflects the figure of the gingerbread man with his stomach missing. Even the placement of the cup mimics where the hole in the stomach is. And her expression is just as sad as the gingerbread man's. Or a simple and straightforward one where you're told exactly what you need to think. A simple narrative, but it's been reinforced by my use of a vintage filter to create the idea that this is a very old image, which balances the very age of the stones, of the headstones. Another really simple narrative. And finally, one that was a bit too close to home. This was at the end of the street we were in at the time. Discordance, elements that at first glance seem out of place or pose questions. So what, for instance, does an image like this pose for you in terms of questions? Or this one that I call lunch. Unclear. Subject has open to a variety of interpretations. So ambiguity, it's a great one. So what am I looking at? Is it a tree? What am I looking at? This has been in my presentation for a long time, but considering the events of this past week, it has added an added frisson of discomfort for me. If you're interested, I'll tell you about these water images later, if we have time. Omission. Again, you're employing a level of photographic literacy where you are asking the person who is going to look at your image to fill it in, to bring something of their own history, imagination to the image, just to fill in what is not there. And it's a great way to engage people. Very simple. What is not there? A very different take. Separating the bird from its surroundings. What does that imply? What do you see? Is it talking about the current state of of climate change, etc.? What does it mean for you? And another one where I'm immediately reminded of Shakespeare's quote, "All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts, but that one man is not there." Trope is a pretty straightforward one. Talks about the figures of design. So we can go straight on to things like this, line, shape, form, or this one. A more difficult one, actually, it's probably a bit easier. Symbolism. I think we all understand what that means, and we can all understand what this is, what it's telling us. Rosemary for remembrance, medals for honor, the skull and crossbones for the submariners. Here's a wider frame of the image that we had before, full of symbolism. And this one, which I put together mainly as a reaction to all of our beautiful fresh fruit and veg being covered in little plastic labels and the incongruity of that. And this one, which to me is a symbol of our wide land, but also of dot paintings, of Aboriginal artworks. It's actually an aerial photograph taken from, I don't know, a couple of thousand feet up, and yet it has the look of an Aboriginal painting. And to me, it always speaks to how do they know so much about their landscape that they can reproduce something that we have to be 2,000 feet up in order to see, and yet they know their land so intimately that they can reproduce it in a dot painting. Dissonance. This is where you have a bit of a frisson of fear or some sort of emotional reaction to an image. A falling child. Does it make you feel uncomfortable? Does it make you feel uncomfortable? This was on the Pacific Highway at Linfield. What questions does it raise? What questions does this raise? What about this one? Space. This is where space actually becomes part of an important part of the composition. So that void is so important to the composition, and is the line of skiers going down and across the top there that creates the relationship. And if you look very, very closely on the right-hand side, there is a hint of an orange parka. That's my son. So this was in Chamonix. I've just walked out of the cafe and Mont Blanc is behind me, and we're at about 11,500 feet. And you could not stay up there for very long at all. Look at the space in this one. The elements are pushed right to the edges, left and right, and yet everything, all that space actually brings those elements together. Here's a more classical use of space, but not quite, a more intimate use of space, if you like. Very high key image where I've actually blown out all of the back of the figure and just left the minimum amount that I could in the image in order to create it. I think it's a very tactile image, but that space is so very important to how the image is appreciated. And this one, where I've actually broken the one image into different sections in order to create space between them. Atmosphere creates or elicits a moodful response from the viewer. Dez is going to hate me for starting with one with fog, because his first words when introducing this is, it's not about a foggy day. Atmosphere is about going to a boxing match and having sweat flying and blood, or going to a bullfight and having the bull pulled out of the arena behind a tractor. But I thought I'd start with this and work my way up. So atmosphere. How's this one? For vibrance, energy, color, shape, form. Or this one for grace, elegance, delicacy, and sheer quietness of the image. Whoops, what have I done? Let me go back. So atmosphere. The contour, design element again, but you can take it to another level to support or add to the character of the image. I took it pretty literally, I have to say. Proximity, near-far relationship. Phil, this is at Gold Street Studios.
Yes, I know it well.
And this one is at Newcastle Baths. Emotion, I think that's pretty straightforward. But you can come into the realm of anthropomorphism as well, and creating emotions that we feel that animals may have. We don't know that for sure. This was, I've forgotten his name, but he's the previous male at Taronga Zoo. He was retired down to Mogo Zoo quite some time ago. But I have a lot of affection for him, because I remember taking my daughter and my niece when they were only about 6 or 7 years of age. And if you know Taronga Zoo, there is, in the enclosure, there is a little cave, and at the back of the cave, there's a window. This is a bit away from the main walk area in front of the gorillas. And we got there very early in the morning, and this gorilla was in the cave facing away from us, playing with the hay and just ignoring us completely. So we stood there for a little while watching him. And the next thing we knew, he had gotten up, and in a split second, he was at the window, pounding on the window at our heads. And I tell you what, we flew backwards and just broke into hysterical laughter that this animal had decided to give us a good talking to. So he stays in my affection. This is his replacement, and he's showing you that he doesn't like his greens. Joy, happiness, emotion. Not sure how I feel about this one. Dad died about 2 weeks after I took this. But to me, it means he knew. There's something in his eyes, and he was ready.
It's a pretty penetrating stare.
Yeah. Illusion. So you're pointing to something indirectly or obliquely. You may remember that terrible photograph of the small boy washed up on the beach when the migrants were trying to escape across the Mediterranean. Now, it's not stated in that image, but of course the image alludes to the problems that immigrants were facing in their desperate need to escape. I don't have anything like that as powerful. And I hope never actually to take an image as powerful as that. But there are plenty of other opportunities to allude to things such as this. This is a typical COVID image done during lockdown. And it was just a house on the street calling out, abandoned, internet down, all is lost. Or this one, where the feeling of being enclosed, of being a prison, I think is very strong without actually having a single human being in there. And a lot of that is created by the shadow. Another one, washed up in the rocks. You could talk about big corporations, the rubbish that is ruining our seas, all of those things. And that is what I'm alluding to with this one. It's a little bit more esoteric, and I'll show you what I think it means for me at any rate. Sidney Nolan's Ned Kelly series.
let me tell you a funny story to interlude for a moment.
Yep.
The John Hunter Hospital, the Department of Public Works architectural team put that together, and the government architect at the time was, his surname was Kelly. So the two IC in the department designed all the rainwater heads around the building in this form as a as a take on Mr. Kelly.
A tribute, I hope. Okay, sensation. Now you can look at Des has used texture as an example. So I actually avoided texture and I thought I would look at the senses. So the sense of touch, the silkiness of the water, the movement. This next one is also about water, but it's definitely not silky and beautiful. Those kids were absolutely loving the mudslide. This is one where you can hear the kookaburras, so it's sound. And the last one I have is smell. The smell of the frangipani. Color. Color is the story in these images. That's a car bonnet. If you ever get the chance to stop in at the car wreckers outside of Cooma, you can pay your money, a bit underhand. I think it was $10 the last time I was there. If you go in summer, be warned of snakes. And whenever you go, take a spray bottle with you. There is a richness there in pattern and color and shape and form that you wouldn't believe. This is a facade of the Museum of Australia, I think, in Canberra. And this was some fun in the studio. Color can also inform you about other things like the temperature. This is a washed out white and blue image. And it should, I hope, give you the feeling of coldness, of winter. It certainly was both. Similarity. Elements that possess shared characteristics that enhance intention. Now, I've made mention, I'm not sure if it was in the main part of the talk, but I have mentioned before that I work now, I very rarely do individual images as an end game. I work in bodies of work, and in this particular case, this was all from a walk I did from the city through the Botanic Gardens to the art gallery. And I could pretend it was a visual exercise. It would be very good of me if I did. But actually, it all came together after the fact. And I wonder now, it begs the question, was I subconsciously taking note of these similarities as I walked through those areas? Because for almost each one of them, I found an equivalent in the art gallery. The water pond on the bottom left was as you leave the Botanic Gardens. And of course, the Aboriginal painting was all about water lilies.
Which happened first?
I started in the city, so bottom right, the city shot, and then walking through the gardens to the art gallery. So, yeah, take note of similarities of things that you are photographing. And I've got a suggestion later on about how you could discern that. But here's another one where similarity, it's what the image is all about. What do you see? What's the content? What's the subject? What do you hear? What do you feel? What is the language used? Roger Balin describes his works as existential psychodramas that touch the subconscious mind and evoke the most vulnerable part of the human condition.
Yep, I'd agree with that.
And I would describe this image as having punctum. It hits you. And his work is characterized, most of his work that I have seen is characterized with punctum.
One of those ones you wouldn't hang on the wall at home.
Yes, yet he is a worldwidely exhibited photographer and videographer. Illusion. So this is where you're pretending one thing is something else. So here is an autumnal scene, which doesn't actually exist unless I have the body to reflect it. And this was done in an old-fashioned, in the studio. I know, Phil, you probably would have played with slides that you would then project onto a body in the studio. Well, this was done with digital projector where the model would play with the imagery that we were throwing onto her and create this image. So the next one, similar but different, because this is an illusion where the nude shape and form there is not a nude at all. There's a nude on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side is a flare of fire from a campfire. And yet I hope that I have created the illusion that there might be a body in there.
How would you make the distinction between illusion and metaphor?
It's difficult. Some of them are difficult. As I said, with simplification and reduction, what is the what is the barrier between them? I think an illusion, though, is when you are actually using something that does not exist to suggest something that does. That's my best way of dividing the two. With a metaphor, I think, yeah, don't ask difficult questions, Tim. We've got a lot to get through. This is my final example of an illusion. And I say it's an illusion because it wasn't even taken with a camera. There is no camera involved. There's no lens involved, yet it is a photograph. It is a lumen print. Actually, I think it's a cyanolumen print, where I've used old photographic paper and layered, these were chrysanthemum petals on top, put them out in the sun and baked them for a few hours. And this is the result. So I'm creating an illusion that this is a photograph in a digital age, when in fact it isn't a photograph of the digital age. So I now have to tell you that I've given you that list, and I have to inform you that it's not an exhaustive list at all. There are over 300 common forms of expressive language, according to Dez. So you're not limited by that list that you've been given. Some others, for example, are scale, context, humor, tone, light, luminosity. So don't feel like you have to come up with an illusion or an illusion or an abstraction. If you find something that is a beautiful illustration of luminosity, go with that. And we'll see how we go. So we're back here. We've looked at record, document, and expressive, studium and punctum. We've looked at expressive language and all of those things down the bottom. And the next thing we'll need to look at is ideation. And would this be an appropriate time, Tim, for a 5-minute break?
Yes, you read my mind precisely.
Okay.
Time for that red, Mr.
Yes.
Brown. Is it going to be the Pinot or is it going to be the Shiraz?
Or if anyone has any questions, feel free. I know it's a lot. I'm doing a visual language dump on you.
That's fantastic.
And
I'm up to about here. I've got a little bit of float left. We'll see how we go.
but as I said, trying to compress something that should take at least a day into an hour or so is and do a good job. I guess that's the other thing. And wanting to do a good job is really difficult. How's it coming across to everyone?
Well, Susan,
It's
I have to
great.
compliment you.
Yeah.
I first saw this when Dez first presented it, when it was in its preliminary form up at the North Coast, one of the Northern Zone meetings. And he didn't use nearly as many illustrations as you have. There's a lot of speaking. It was after dinner, and we'd actually had a fair bit to drink at dinner, and a bottle of port was passing round as he tried to speak. So very difficult without the illustrations. I think you've done a wonderful job.
Oh, thank you. Dez is full of stories, and I tell you what, he is a born storyteller. So he can keep you enthralled, but he does generally have more time than I have had.
So, Philip, at what stage did the paper plane start when his back was turned?
I think he ended up speaking to one or two people. Everyone else had gone to bed.
Well, I should probably read to you. I sent Dez a message, and I told this to Tim earlier. I sent him a message just before we started. And I said, "Hi, Dez, about to give a talk on image evaluation criteria to Mosman, and wondering if you have any hints on how to impersonate a grumpy old fart."
He'd have liked that.
And he wrote back saying, "I think you should be yourself. I do grumpy old farts so well that were you to try and emulate, you will fail." There you go. I'll just put the next slide up and then ignore it.
Feel free to disappear for a cup of tea if you'd like, Susan.
I'll be back in a sec.
Tim, just before this one, I was on another Zoom meeting, and if you noticed in the qualifications that Dez has, the second one is a fellowship of the IPT, which is the Institute of Photographic Technology. And so just before this, I was at their annual general meeting on Zoom from Melbourne, and the speaker was from Sweden, and she trained at RMIT and has been all over the place, but working on the stomata of plants. And because she was unable to bring plants into Australia to look at under the electron microscope, she made dental impressions, the plastic material they use for dental impressions. She made those of the leaves and was able to bring them into Australia. Really interesting talk. I'm sure we can get it because they record everything as well.
I think Jen might be a bit interested in something like that.
Okay. I'm all on my own tonight. Can't believe it. My husband's down the coast.
Kids haven't left home, have they?
Oh, yeah.
Aren't you luck?
Actually, I've got 2 sons living together in Wollongong with their wife/partners and the dog. So we do tend to go down there quite a bit. Yeah, they have left home, and our house is a bit like it expands and contracts depending on how many people are in the house. We always seem to be able to occupy all of the rooms though, even if there's just two of us.
Well, that was our plan. So ours keep on leaving and coming back. So on the last departure, we changed the spare bedroom to a studio. So they're buggered. They can't come in now.
I've heard that changing the lock is a good idea too.
Yeah, that too.
Oh, we're stuffed because we've got quite a few years ago now, my husband approached me to say, I'd like to build a music studio in the backyard. And I said, that's fine, so long as you build me a dark room. So he did.
I remember that.
Yeah. So I've got my dark room and he's got his music studio.
Have you seen that cartoon doing the rounds on the photography groups lately? It's the guy standing at the kitchen sink doing the washing up, and the wife comes in and says, "You did the laundry yesterday, doing the washing up today. What lens did you buy?"
I didn't think anyone knew that.
Well, I did ask my husband yesterday, actually. I said, I don't have many compulsions, and he agreed. And I then went on to say, the one exception is books, and particularly books on photography. And he agreed, yes. And I said, do you have a problem with that? He went, no. So yes, I can keep buying more books that I can possibly read. It's wonderful.
It's good that we're in a visual part of the world, because then you can just look at the pictures. It's a lot quicker.
Yeah.
We have a rule in our household: one in, one out. So,
right.
So mine is toys, and Carol's is cookbooks. So,
all right.
We have a status quo on amount of space that gets taken up.
Oh, so you bring one lens in, she's got to lose one cookbook. Is that the way it works?
No. Unfortunately not.
Well, this is my latest. I don't know if you can see it. It's called Photography Rules. So I'm trying to find out what they are.
Oh yeah.
There aren't any, Susan.
Yeah. That's what you're telling us.
There's a whole book on photography rules. It says essential.
It's fake news.
Essential do's and don'ts from great photographers. But I think it should be photography rules, ! Photography rules.
With a Z, yeah.
Shall I show you what I've been doing lately? Let me see if I can get one. As a direct result of the fires down at Bendalong, I believe, the cicadas this year were incredible, absolutely incredible. My husband was out on the balcony one day and he can measure sound, and he measured them at 93.5 decibels. And
that's an OH&S issue.
Yeah.
I couldn't get over the number, and many of them would fall into the sea and then get washed up on the beach. So I have a collection of cicada wings, which I have direct to sol plate exposed, and then created these prints on the printing press. I don't know if you can see them very well. But they are my current set of, again, cameraless photographs, if you can call them photographs or prints. We also had 2 days when the beach was covered in blue bottles, just thousands and thousands of blue bottles. And we had the best water views, which we have never experienced before, because the area we were in was burnt up to the front fence. The The tree on the front footpath in front of the house we stay in was burnt right up the trunk. And it was only through the auspices of our neighbour, who was an ex-RFS character, and some of the other locals, that they saved the village of Bendalong, basically. It's amazing.
It's one of our favourite spots to engage with the stingrays.
Yes, yeah, we're down there a lot. Well, we go down every Christmas. We're always down there at Christmas. And we were down there on the 3rd of January last year, waiting to be evacuated. And when we were evacuated, we went out through Bendalong Road whilst the fires were still raging on either side. But they knew that the next day the fire was going to hit Bendalong well and truly. So they just wanted everyone out. So it was a fairly tense time.
I think it was about, well, it was a little bit earlier in the year, but we the club had a trip to Tassie just before the COVID lockdown, and we'd driven down, and so we got to escape the border lockdowns by driving back to Sydney. But at that time, it was still when everything was pretty dead from the fires, and driving that whole coastal strip all the way from Melbourne up to Sydney was quite an eye-opener.
Yeah, and by the time we got down, we wanted to get back down because we owed the locals a huge vote of thanks, and we wanted to express that to them. And we wanted to do the bring an empty esky thing as well. We just weren't able to do it between COVID and other things.
That's it.
So we went down with a completely empty car. And I must say, I think we propped up the economy very, very well. But going through the highway, all of the little growths were out. And if you didn't really look, you wouldn't understand just how bad the fires were. But we went into Conjola one time. We had to go in. I didn't want to, because I didn't want to be that person who went gawking at Conjola Park, but we had to go in. And Conjola Park still looks as though a bomb's hit it. It was just massive through there.
Well, during one of the COVID trips, we went through the Brindabellas from Canberra down to Adaminaby, and there's a whole swathe of that there is no regrowth in. That it's if you ever if you want something bizarre as a landscape to go and have a look at, that whole area for about 100 k's, there's not anything that's regrowing, and it's eerily quiet, and there's just ash on the forest floor and black trees and nothing else. It's quite extraordinary.
Yeah, and it's scary. Okay, we're ready to
go?
All
right, ready for action.
All right, we're looking at the next level up, which is the image evaluation criteria. Sorry, I was muted then, I think. You must have muted everyone. Can you hear me?
Yep, I accidentally did it and I couldn't unmute you.
Okay. All right. So in a document headed Conceptual Base for Education in Image Appraisal, Dez talks about how you can approach appraising an image. And he talks about art being inclusive. It can be disturbing, it can be outrageous, it can be incomprehensible, ambiguous, vicious, corrosive, confronting, provocative. And I can hear him saying these words. If you ever heard him talk, I can hear him saying these words: experimental, sublime. It can be art, it can be an idea, it can be in a communication, it can be an expression, it can be a creation. Appraisal of such imagery will include recognition of and reference to how well the image represents the image evaluation criteria that's before you now. So we need to talk about what these things are and how they may affect your understanding of your imagery in particular. So ideation. What is the idea or concept that is the subject? Why was the image created? Is the treatment literal or expressive or both? And I would point out, to keep in the back of your mind, how different you might approach an image that is a record to one that is a document to one that is conceptual. So I'm just going to show you this work. And again, it is a body of work. And I thought what I would do is go through the comments that Dez wrote after I presented this work to him. It is called Grief is the Price We Pay for Love. And it was my response to my mother's death whilst doing a portfolio of work. So I'm reading this in order to give you an idea of how he traverses, in this case, a set of images, but it could be equally as well applied to an image. Does that make sense to people? Okay. This portfolio is rich with meaning on so many levels. The title of the work alone heralds this. At an objective level of meaning, it is about the death of someone. This is a reality. We all must face our mortality and that of those we love. Self-evidently, this is not easy. So he's talking about at the objective level. Now he goes on to, at the subjective level, this really triggers off a wave of emotions, thoughts, feelings. It is a reminder of the passage of time, of the circle and cycle of life. It is a time to value and celebrate the person we miss, a time to remind ourselves of loved ones near who remain and who share this personal grief with you. It is a time too to make statements about what is important to you about, in this case, the mother who is gone. This portfolio does so. It is a visual statement that in some way seeks to defy the reality of the death of the mother. It is a statement of and about personal strength. As the artist's statement makes clear, memory remains a link. I'll have to explain the artist's statement because it's not very clear on the image. Memory evokes other memories, other feelings, and a sense of not so much a loss, but a mere separation. It is a great statement with its combination of observance and reminiscence. The portfolio offers powerful sentiments, powerful emotions, powerful triggers, all in the guise of beautiful, timeless cyanotypes. So now he's talking about the presentation. A technique from yesteryear, from times past. As such, the selection of this technique is a metaphor for the reality of life and death invoked in these 5 images. The portfolio offers a look at the physical reminders of what were important personal effects or keepsakes. Images of objects left behind that in some way signal a quality, a feeling, a memory, a moment of recall, of recognition, of rich, poignant thoughts about who, when, what, and why. The portfolio is about punctum. It resonates with the experience of Roland Barthes on the loss of his mother. Here, with a panel of 5 beautifully made cyanotypes, the artist has generated a sequence of objects that were part of her mother's life and now shared as part of her own grieving process, and as a visual statement that moving on is easier because she has her mother still with her. Powerful, strong, vision-rich, emotionally and intellectually, a keen insight has been offered. The cyanotypes at a technical level are excellent. The arrangements of elements work within work thanks to shape and form etched by sensitive lighting. The sacred cards at the end of the panel are a reminder of faith, a reminder that in one's faith with one's own intellectual and emotional frame, that if one keeps faith with one's own intellectual and emotional frames, then it is okay, all will be well. Mum is never gone whilst there is memory. Photography serves memory well. I found this portfolio moving, a jewel, a rich and emotional visual journey of homage and tribute made, of subject and content links that are both respectful and profoundly human. So if only we could all do as well on every image as a judge that we are faced with. I do envy Dez his articulateness and his grasp of what is important to convey to people about their imagery. And he's certainly done an outstanding job in my mind to the work that I put up for that. But if we go back to what was the idea, he's shown what the idea has come across to him. He's encapsulated my work better than I could have in how he's responded to it. I hope that makes sense to people, and the illustration of the words that he brought to it illustrates what I was trying to get at. Creativity, another big area of ideation. Creativity is about making new by bringing to a tangible form an idea drawn from one's imagination. Creativity is a thought transferred by a process into a product in such a way as to introduce or extend our understanding, our insights, or our intention. It is not appropriation, imitation, or novelty. It is originality, it is innovation. And you can look at his questions there. Does it offer a fresh interpretation? Does it engage the audience? I've never seen anyone do a nude like this. So I'm hoping that this is marked as an original and creative attempt. The aesthetics, the visual beauty. So what compositional and design elements have been used, and have they been effective in communicating idea and intention? So it refers to the visual quality of the work, its beauty, its power, its weight. So you have something quite simple and beautiful, and you have something else, which is Bill Henson. Now, the aesthetics, there are no rules here. Judgments about aesthetics are usually heavily value-laden through social and cultural conventions. This can give rise to conflict between maker and viewer. And you will have seen, I'm sure, the model that has been, the female figure, the model that was given to a number of different people in different countries to create their idea of beauty. Same person, same woman, but totally different ideas of what beauty meant in those different countries. So that's an example of the cultural conventions that may dictate the aesthetics of an image and whether it's acceptable. The image quality, again, we refer back to the technical features. Does it support your intention? It refers to the technical competency of the author. The ultimate test of technical prowess is that it is so skillfully employed, no one notices it. The image is appreciated as a whole, not for its color fidelity or its depth of field, for example. Two very straightforward images. Presentation. Does the craft employed to display the work enhance the viewer's enjoyment of it? Does the way the work is presented tell us something about the photographer's values and attitudes towards their work? Communication. It refers to the richness of the visual language used, and in particular, the storytelling qualities of the image. Images can narrate, explain, comment, interact, establish, define, convey, argue, destroy. And I guess it's when you put those images up on an exhibition wall and you have people coming in to talk about them or to talk to you about them, that's the ultimate form of communication and the ultimate test of success as well, about whether your image actually does communicate. What do you see? What's the subject? What's the content? What do you feel? What do you hear? What's been used to create the image? Is the image evocative? Does it trigger an emotional response? It may change your behavior. your insights, your understandings, your emotional climate or intellectual reference points. Think of the best war photographs. I put best in inverted commas. Think of the work of Sebastião Salgado. An evocative image cannot be ignored. Dez comments that work that does not invoke a response has failed to communicate, and photography is a communication art.
So where does banality sit in that?
Banality?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big discussion, actually. And I was reading only today about an exhibition of Irving Penn's work, I think it was. You might confirm for me, Phil. It was a beautiful set of palladium or platinum, I think, images of cigarette butts.
Yep, I remember it well.
Yeah. And yet it was lauded as works of art. And, you know, there is always the contention of what art is. So that I think is a whole nother presentation, Tim. But banality has its place. What message does it give? That's what you have to really, with any image, you have to ask, what are you seeing? What are you feeling? What are you hearing? What is the subject? What is the content? Perhaps we're missing what the subject is by being seduced by the banality of the content.
It's that whole genre of American suburbanism.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So how effective is an image? Importantly, do the techniques used serve the idea? How much is camera seeing and how much of it is imaginative seeing? So the relationship between technique and image is such that they complement one another and serve to reinforce, elaborate, and expand our understanding of what has been attempted. Techniques have been used to add meaning and definition to the message and not used for their own sake. So in this example, which is a Cornish, it's in New Zealand, a Cornish minehead, if you like. I deliberately stripped out anything that suggested recent times and reduced it to a monochromatic approach to again imply age. But I did not replace the sky. The sky was there. I'm having great trouble reconciling this new sky replacement thing in Photoshop. Don't like it at all. So this one, again, a long exposure, just to silken the water and just allow the eye to go to the falling rain in the background.
It's a beautiful sky you dropped in there, Susan.
Thank you, Tim. Can you put yourself on mute, please? All right, this next series of images is actually an exhibition that was part of Head On last year, and of course, obviously, was only online. But it goes to showing an evolution of an idea into its completed form, and also illustrates how interpretation can change over time. So bear with me. So this is a sequence of work from an exhibition called Valentino, A Light Veil. As we go through it, think about the technical aspects of the work. Have they served the idea? So a visit to Macquarie University, whilst my father was nearby having his hearing tested, took me to both its gallery, which at the time was featuring Tamara Dean, and to the library. At random, whilst I was in the library, I pulled out a book by Uta Barth from the shelves. I was aware of her work, but not familiar with it. So for the short time I had, I absorbed her approach. My immediate response was to defocus my camera for the walk back to retrieve my father. It was quite a joyous experience, and resulted in a set of images that I believe turned the mundane into things that demanded attention. Or as Uta Barth states, the question for me is, how can I make you aware of your own activity of looking instead of losing your attention to thoughts about what it is that you are looking at? And you'll notice that there is a quote from Roland Barthes which accompanied each image. A photograph is always invisible. It is not it that we see. This is the second one. The photograph becomes surprising when we do not know why it has been taken. Now, that joyous return to collect my father was how it started. Then social distancing and the coronavirus had thrown another veil over the images. Each of the parts of the university that I photographed are designed for the employment or enjoyment of humans, yet they are empty of people, and this seemed prescient as I took the photographs just before coronavirus hit. So my joy in taking those images was transposed into a strange juxtaposition of anticipation and dread. The anticipation that these spaces would once again be filled, and the dread that they wouldn't. They were not finished with me. Life had another lesson to give. Over the course of the previous year that I took the photographs in, my mother-in-law died, and my father had a serious fall that broke both his body and his mind. Anticipation and dread are still present, but now the spaces have become personal. The dread is knowing that some people, my people, will not inhabit them again. The anticipation is that they will become other people's spaces, from theoretical and light-hearted to personal and gut-wrenching, and that is life. That is what I wrote as an accompaniment to the head-on exhibition, which featured them. I felt compelled to pair each image with a quote from Roland Barthes. And it's strange that that mirrored a lot of what was going on with the work that I did with my mother, and how Dez pulled that out of the portfolio work that I did. But again, the images were not finished with me. In September of last year, after this work was actually completed, my father died. So now that the real body and the emanation and the transmission that Roland Barthes speaks of here is much more personal again, and it's my father that I'm looking for in these images. It's also strange, the way that the comments that he is making here were so true to the time that we were experiencing last year. There is only one way left to escape the alienation of present day society, to retreat ahead of it. Perhaps we shall never see each other again. Perhaps we shall meet again, but fail to recognize each other. Our exposure to different seas and suns has changed us. For me, these images and these words became his epitaph. And one person who gave me some feedback on the body of work summed it up like this: an extraordinary and powerful body of work that expresses the dimming of embrace and blurring of memories for place and people. And it just seems such an amazing summary of what a very strange and compelling and disturbing and heartbreaking year it had been, and not just for me. Influences, capacity of the image to recognize and respect photographic heritage and conventions. Well, that's me all over. Innovation that builds on the aesthetic, the ideas, the concepts and imaging principles embodied in our visual heritage ought to be recognized and valued. So this is the lead-in image for a portfolio of work that I did using printmaking, but still using an object placed onto a light-sensitive solar plate to create the image. So using all of the historical processes that were once used to create imagery. And then, of course, the difference being using the ink and the printing press to actually create the impression of the work. Enhancement, is it finished? Is it resolved? Is it a work in progress? I feel that this set of images is a work in progress. It's still waiting for me to create something slightly different about it, to bring out something that I haven't quite touched on yet. And it's all about that dark figure in the third part of the triptych. But this one, as simple as it is a complete image. It is resolved. There is nothing more to be said. It is standalone. It's done. Can you demonstrate commitment to creative excellence? Is it ordinary or extraordinary? Is it meritorious? Does it convey a sense of self? I guess now we're getting into the difficult parts where we actually have to show ourselves as part of our imagery. And it's very easy to hide. It's very easy to hide behind the show image and not unveil yourself to the world. But I'll tell you some of the reasons why I've found that impossible to do lately. This is about applications about the pursuit of perfection, or as a minimum, the use of professional and personal best practice. So again, a set of images that comprises an exhibition, all aerial photographs taken over Lake Eyre or in the surrounding environs. Little Cessna, no helicopter for me. And I have a series of, these are the series that I would title Salt. I have another series that is titled Water and a third that is titled Ground. So they're complete bodies of work within themselves, but the three sections make up an exhibition. Is the image ready for publication, competition, exhibition, inclusion in a portfolio? This is the beginning image of a series of images of How Long Bay, which was exhibited in an exhibition called Time Is, Time Was, Time Is Past. Another set of triptychs from an exhibition called Monochrome Diaries. You may remember the abstract that I showed earlier of the buildings. This was the result where I have stood in the street, looked up and juxtaposed various buildings to create new architecture where their lines meet. And again, a monochrome approach. Looks like I'm very monochromatic. The prints, that was part of the exhibition wall. Again, all skeleton leaves put directly onto a solar plate and then printed. So actually getting close to the end. These are the 5 core questions that we've cycled back to. What are the ideas behind the creation of the image? How well does the image communicate these ideas? Are the technical aspects of the image appropriate? What does the image tell us about the photographer? What is the value of the image as an artistic statement? The core questions, I think I might have read this before, but I'm going to read it again. Are powerful devices to use to deconstruct any image, as they have the power to organize a significant amount of information, insight, and interpretation. And you may, now that we've gone most of the way through the talk, you may realize that they are powerful and they will give you a construct. In deconstructing an image, it is not essential to ask each question of each image. In constructing an image, it may be essential to ask each question. So another summary, slightly put together slightly differently, of the different levels that you can approach an image from. Keep in mind that you can move in and out of these levels, up and down and sideways. There will be a level that you need to address, one or more, wherever you are in your evolution as a photographer. Even and perhaps especially advanced workers, you need to be consistently re-evaluating where you are. Personally, I find that the 4th and 5th core questions is where I found myself lately. And portfolio work, exhibition work, addresses these issues more deeply again. Here we go, we're back. These are your tools. These levels of evaluation are your tools. Whether constructing or deconstructing, ask yourself these questions. Your intention, what do you wish to say? What do you wish to share? Your meaning, how do I convert this? How do I convert this to the audience? Convey this, I think this should have been. Interpretation, your research, you edit, you cull, you trial, you sample, you test. Representation, what is your mode of presentation going to be? And expression, what is the text going to say? And again, Dez refers to an image as a text sometimes. So intention, meaning, interpretation, representation, expression. Here's another tool. Image evaluation checklist that you can apply to an image. You've got your 5 core questions, and then you've got your design elements, your expressive language, your technical language. So each time you look at an image, beyond asking your 5 questions, or your few questions, which we'll go back to in a minute, you can summarize what is striking you about the image. And particularly, don't forget that the dilemmas can exist at any level. They're not necessarily just technical. It could be that the idea is not being conveyed, or that the idea, basically that the idea is not being conveyed. So here's another part of a checklist that you can use. What do you see? This is a very simple, straightforward approach to any image. What do you see? Content, subject, what do you hear, feel? What is the language used? This is about you and your response to an image. I generally believe that looking at your photos in a structured yet fluid way will help you overcome roadblocks and give you insight into the next challenge in your evolution as a photographer. And by the way, I always give advice. I also think that a personal mantra can help illuminate a way forward. This is mine. I always keep coming back to this. One should not only photograph things for what they are, but for what else they are. Keep in mind, rules are foolish, arbitrary, mindless things that raise you quickly to a level of acceptable mediocrity, then prevent you from progressing further. That's Bruce Barnum from the book, The Art of Photography. Nowhere within this work that Dez has presented, or I have presented for Dez, I must ask him if he's happy with that, have you found any rules? If you found one, either I miscommunicated or you misinterpreted. Find your photography. Another example of punctum. There were some expressive language sections I mentioned that I found difficult to illustrate. as they were outside my lexicon, my visual vocabulary. And I could have gotten, you know, the big names to illustrate it, but I actually thought it was more important to show that I was having difficulty. Over time, they may become more available to me as my photographic potential continues to expand. Yet with each presentation I give, I learn, I hone, and I realize I have insights into what sort of photographer I am. I would urge you to use the tools presented, the schematic, the shorthand version, what do you see, etc., and the checklist as ways forward with your photography. One of the ways I would suggest you do it is if you use Lightroom, change your keywords. Start using things like ideation or ambiguity or illusion or illusion. All of the terms that we've talked about tonight, start categorizing your images with that keyword and use Lightroom to build up galleries of expressive language, not just images. So what I've learned about me, this is my current status. So I would urge you to, whilst using this criteria to evaluate images, to keep going back to the question of what does the image tell us about the photographer? In essence, how do you wish to be known? Now, I added just this afternoon 2 more pieces to this puzzle of what I am as a photographer. One of them was experimental, and the other was playful. I am prepared as a photographer to make mistakes. And I think I haven't actually got that down there. I didn't know how to summarize that. Mistakeful didn't just quite gel with me. Anyway.
Experimental.
Experimental will do, yeah. But over time, I have given presentations about my portfolios. And the experience is I go into a room and I set up every portfolio and I am surrounded by years worth of work. And I look at it and I am overwhelmed because I see myself up on those boards. And it is a moment where I think, can I do this? Can I show myself so blatantly and so boldly to the world that grouping all of my work in one place at one time is really challenging? But at the same time, I learn, I move forward. I was listening to Keith Carter yesterday, and he stated that to find value in your photography, shoot always for yourself. Or Georgia O'Keeffe's statement that to create one's own world in any of the arts takes courage. Photography has no rules. It is not a sport. It is the result that counts no matter how it is achieved. Ultimately, Dez's work is an incredible tool. It works and it takes work. Practice on your own images or any images. Dez's favorite is The Guardian online. He reckons he's up at 4 o'clock every morning checking out The Guardian's photo stories. But do the hard work. It is worth it. Because otherwise, the frightening thing is there is only you and your camera. The limitations in your photography are in yourself. For what we see is what we are. Best piece of advice, find a group of like-minded people to share your photography, you're already there, over a cup of coffee or tea. Because this is what success really does look like. Have no fear of perfection. You'll never reach it. Thank you. I'm done. Now you can tell me whether I actually met the brief.
Excellently done.
Certainly lots and lots and lots of
Oh,
things to
probably
think about.
too much. That's the problem.
Yeah, well, what's that? You failed one of your original tests there. It was reduction, Susan.
Oh, no. Not true. That's not true at all. All right, I'm going to stop sharing.
Susan, for a newcomer to all of this, that was amazingly inspirational and of such, there's such importance and recognition of paths to be followed and experimentation. It's been absolutely brilliant. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, I have to give Des the credit that is due. Yes, I've taken it and I've run with it, and I think you may have seen me use it in judging, but I have to say as an aside that I never actually have time to develop to the point where I can get to the 5 core questions or anything like that. It's just, you have to live with the fact that when you do a judging, the time constraints doesn't allow you to go in depth. But it is never been meant as you must do this, you must see an image like that, there's no musts about it. It is purely a tool that you can use for your own development. And that was why Des developed it in the first place. I mean, he has taught thousands upon thousands of students and has found it to work. And I found him to be an honorable man who speaks the truth.
And I think you conveyed that message so beautifully tonight. So again, thanks so very much.
Pleasure. And if there are questions about slides that I've used that you might want to see again, just tell Tim so that he can have a chat to me, and I might be able to do some send some more information through. But there's it's a huge amount of info to try and convey.
I think one of the interesting takeaways of that is, given the demographic of our camera club,
most camera clubs
is the requisite of a rich life experience to create a compelling image. And the experiences that we all have amongst us, we should have an excellent repertoire of rich life experience which we can put into our images.
Absolutely.
So instead of producing pretty images that people like, we can now load them full of content and storytelling and narrative of our own experience. And that's the thing that people identify with as fellow humans. That's what they want to see. That's what they want to identify in their images.
Yeah. And so, I have to tell you that Des was very quick to point that out, but looking at the last workshop he did for us, which was a few years ago now, he looked at his audience and he said quite straightforwardly, "You don't have a lot of time left."
Pertinent.
Say that again.
So the other thing I was reading during the week was about a landscape, putting together a good landscape image. All right, because my love, and I think a few others, is landscape, because you just love getting out there and being away from people and sharing the landscape. But so Matt Dallas was reflecting on Robert Adams' take on what makes a good landscape image. And he tried to summarize it in 3 words, which was geography, autobiography, and metaphor. And if you get all 3 of those in a landscape image, you've got something that people are going to be able to identify with, because especially the last point you're talking about was just sharing something of your own life. If you've got that autobiography in that image, it's telling the story of what you've experienced in that landscape. And that's the thing that people then respond to.
Yeah.
The other great one is...
If you don't bring yourself to your imagery,
yeah,
why are you doing it, really?
That's right.
And it's been hard for me as an introvert to allow that expression to happen. It's taken me a long time to recognize, one, that I was doing it, and then to be free with it.
Yep.
And actually now pursue that as an integral part of why I take a photograph.
Yep. And that's the important part of finding like-minded people, because you're making yourself vulnerable.
Yes.
And you've got to have an environment where you can be prepared to share that vulnerability, and then that strength will come out in your images.
Yep.
Yep. The other takeaway, which I think we should all look at, and we should go and register with the conceptual group at the Australian, the APS, is that if you want to make money, you become a conceptual photographer.
That's right.
So that's where the money is. Not in nice landscapes, although Peter Lick has sold one for $1 million, I think. But most of it's in conceptual work. So
yeah, well, don't forget that's a secondary market too. The artists aren't getting that money.
yeah, that's true. There's a few commissions on top.
Yeah.
And the very last one, which is a fantastic, if you seem to love your quotes. I've got a great Picasso one, which and he used to say that he starts with an idea and it becomes something else.
Yeah, that's right.
So that's part of the exploration. So you go into creating the work without preconception, but if you do go in with preconception, then it won't end up being what you thought it was going to be.
No,
so,
that's right. That's right.
Yep.
Well, we're doing the portfolio this year, and I'm so far it's up to 40 people I'll be mentoring, and
well, if you've got to give a response like Dez did on your 5 cyanotypes for 40 people, you'll be pretty busy.
Well, luckily, I don't actually do that. Actually, I talk to them throughout the year. So we will have meetings throughout the year, and we will bring another person in to evaluate in a cold sense, so that the portfolios are assessed purely as how they strike that person. But it is very much, you start with an idea and it will hopefully evolve during the course of the year. Okay. I always counsel people to not hold on to, don't come in with a really strict idea for your portfolio, because then you'll be stymied by sticking to that idea when other opportunities might come up and actually transform it into something else. So yeah, it's going to be a big year for me.
It is. It's a bit like life. You got to head down the road and see what happens.
Oh, yeah.
It's that's where the excitement and the adventures happen. But you got to be walking down the road.
Yeah. You got to have your camera with you.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right. Any last minute questions for Susan, or we'll let her slip off and catch up with her in another couple of weeks when she's going to test our mettle, see what we've come up with and how expressive we've been able to be with our imagery. So that'll be the test.
300 plus. 300 plus choices.
That's it. But because it's digital, we'll still be limited to one color, one monochrome. So that means that you can put all your effort into just 2 images rather than having to find 4 to come up with. And it also takes the load off the assessor. So because then we can concentrate and talk about those images. So
yeah, that would be good.
Should be a good night.
To have that extra time and actually be able to go through, use the tools that I've outlined tonight, so that that would be absolutely excellent. Yeah,
and load up your images with all that baggage. So
or none. Simplify, reduce. Yeah. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you
thanks
for having
again.
me.
Fantastic.
Thanks, Susan.
Thanks, Susan.
You can give Dez some feedback about whether I was grumpy enough.
You'll have to pass on his email address and we'll spam him. So.
Okay.
Thanks, Susan.
Good night, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
All right.
Thanks again.
Good night.